The same psychology that makes loot boxes addictive, that keeps you grinding in games you don't even enjoy anymore, that made you sink hundreds of dollars into a mobile game before you realized you were hooked. That's the exact same psychology being used against you in your job, your relationships and your social circles right now. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who decoded the human psyche in the early 1900s, identified the specific psychological vulnerabilities that manipulators have been exploiting ever since. The difference is, now they've gotten really good at it. Every day people are asking you questions that sound reasonable on the surface, but are actually psychological traps designed to make you doubt yourself, give up your boundaries, and do what they want. According to recent research, 52% of employees have experienced workplace manipulation, 74% of online players face harassment, and the numbers keep climbing. The manipulators aren't just the obvious narcissists and toxic bosses. They're using sophisticated psychological tactics that bypass your rational mind and hit you where you're most vulnerable. Remember the last time a toxic teammate blamed you for the loss, made you question whether you actually played well and left you feeling like maybe you are the problem? Or when your boss used language that made you doubt your own competence? That's not random toxicity. That's calculated manipulation, exploiting specific psychological principles Jung identified nearly a century ago. Understanding these 5 questions isn't just about avoiding manipulation. It's about reclaiming your reality. When you can recognize these tactics in real time, you stop being the NPC, non-playable character, in someone else's game and start being the player with full control over your character. You stop grinding in relationships that drain you. You stop letting toxic bosses gaslight you about your own competence. You stop falling for the same psychological traps that gaming companies, toxic partners, and manipulative colleagues have been using to control your behavior. Before we dive into the 5 questions, you need to understand the psychological architecture Jung discovered, because manipulators already understand it, and they're using it against you. Think of your psyche like a character in a complex RPG. You have visible stats, your persona, the mask you show the world, but you also have hidden stats, your shadow self, containing everything you've repressed or denied about yourself. You have projection mechanics, where you unconsciously attribute your own traits to others. And you have archetypal programming, universal patterns of human behavior that run like background processes in your psychological operating system. Your shadow self is everything you deem unacceptable about yourself. For American men especially, massive amounts get forced into the shadow: emotions, vulnerability, weakness, fear. The cultural programming runs deep. Real men don't cry, be tough, don't show weakness. This creates a massive vulnerability that manipulators exploit relentlessly. When someone says, "Why are you being so emotional?" they're not making an observation. They're weaponizing your shadow against you. Projection works like this. Whatever you hate most intensely in others often reveals your own shadow. Ever rage at a teammate for throwing when you also made mistakes? That's projection. Manipulators become deliberate hooks for your projections, then use them against you. They'll accuse you of what they're actually doing, creating a dizzying reversal that leaves you defending yourself instead of addressing their behavior. Your persona is the social mask you wear. Your professional self, your family self, your gaming persona. Each context gets a different mask. Over-identify with any persona, and you become vulnerable to persona attacks. When someone says, "As a professional, shouldn't you work weekends?" they're attacking your persona to control your behavior. Archetypes are universal patterns residing in what Jung called the collective unconscious: the hero, the caregiver, the victim, the ruler. You unconsciously play out these roles, and manipulators cast you in specific archetypes to script your behavior. The guilt trip, "After everything I've done for you," exploits the caregiver shadow. The challenge, "Aren't you going to save this situation?" forces you into the hero role. Research from multiple studies shows that masculine gender roles powerfully predict vulnerability to emotional manipulation in both sexes. For men specifically, masculine role identification was the sole significant predictor of manipulation susceptibility. This isn't about weakness. It's about having psychological vulnerabilities that our culture creates and manipulators exploit. Question 1. Why are you being so emotional? This question weaponizes the masculine shadow, the cultural conditioning that emotions equal weakness. When someone deploys this, they're not addressing your concern. They're attacking how you feel to avoid addressing what you said. The psychology is surgical. By labeling your legitimate reactions as too emotional, the manipulator activates shame around vulnerability, forces emotional content back into your shadow, makes you doubt the validity of your own feelings, and establishes themselves as the rational authority. You end up apologizing for having a reaction instead of them apologizing for their behavior. In gaming, you've seen this constantly. Call out toxic behavior and get told, "It's just a game, why are you so mad?" Report harassment and hear, "Imagine being this tilted." The tactic is identical. Dismiss legitimate concerns by attacking the emotion behind them. In workplaces, this manifests as, "Why are you being so sensitive about this?" after unfair treatment, or "Can't you take a joke?" after inappropriate comments. In relationships, it's, "Why are you making such a big deal?" or "You're overreacting again," when you raise legitimate concerns. The pattern is always the same: deflect from content by attacking emotion. Research on masculinity threats shows that when masculine identity is challenged, men experience it as an existential threat. This makes the tactic devastatingly effective. Studies found that 52% of employees experienced workplace harassment, with emotional invalidation as the #1 gaslighting tactic, creating self-doubt in 89% of targets. The defense strategy is straightforward, but requires practice. First, recognize the trap. They're attacking how you feel to avoid addressing what you said. Then, redirect to content. Let's focus on the issue, not my reaction to it. If they persist, name the tactic. That's deflection. Address the actual concern. Maintain your frame. Your emotions are data, not defects. Use the formula. I'm not being emotional. I'm responding appropriately to your specific behavior. Think of this like a boss using a fear debuff in a game. It's designed to weaken your confidence stat. Counter it by knowing it's a mechanic, not reality. Question 2. If you really cared, you'd do this. This question creates a false equivalence between your identity and compliance. The manipulator attacks your persona, your role identity as partner, team member, friend, and exploits archetypal expectations. They create cognitive dissonance. If I don't comply, does that mean I'm not these things? They're using your own values as weapons against you. You've heard this in gaming. If you were really committed to the raid team, you'd be online for every progression night. The guild leader weaponizes your identity as a player to extract unreasonable compliance. The toxic teammate says, if you cared about winning, you'd play the meta instead of your main. Same psychological exploit. In workplaces, it's, if you're really a team player, you'll work this weekend, or real professionals don't need work-life balance. In relationships, it's, if you really loved me, you wouldn't question me, or people who care don't keep track of who does more. In social contexts, it's, if you were really my friend, you'd lend me money, or family doesn't say no to each other. Research shows guilt-based manipulation is the second most effective tactic after gaslighting. This tactic is particularly effective on caregiver and hero archetypes, people who genuinely value helping and protecting others. Studies found this used in 77% of emotionally abusive relationships and creates compliance in 73% of initial encounters. Why does it work so well? It targets your self-concept directly, creates a false dichotomy where you must comply or abandon your identity, exploits genuine positive values, and makes refusal feel like moral failure. For men conditioned to be providers and protectors, this hits especially hard. The defense requires separating identity from compliance. I can be a team player and maintain boundaries. Challenge the premise, loving you doesn't mean doing whatever you ask. Reframe the concept. Real team players also respect work-life boundaries. Call out the manipulation. That's guilt-tripping, not a genuine request. Use the formula. Being a good partner is demonstrated through mutual respect, not blind compliance with demands. This is like a charm ability in gaming. They're trying to override your agency by possessing your character. Save against it by maintaining your actual values separate from their weaponized definition. Question 3. You're just projecting, aren't you? This is meta-manipulation, using Jungian concepts as weapons. The manipulator accuses you of projection to deflect legitimate concerns, uses psychological language to sound authoritative, reverses victim and offender in what's called DARVO, deny, attack, reverse, victim and offender, and makes you doubt your own perception. They're weaponizing therapy culture against you. In gaming, you've experienced this. You call out a teammate for repeatedly griefing, and they respond, "You're just projecting because you fed lane yesterday." They're using the concept of projection itself as a deflection shield. If they can make you question whether you're the problem, they win. In workplaces, an employee raises concerns about favoritism, and the boss responds, "Sounds like you're projecting your own insecurity about your performance." The boss is actually showing favoritism, but now the employee is defending themselves. In relationships, when you notice suspicious behavior and ask about it, you hear, "You're just projecting your own trust issues from past relationships. They might actually be cheating, but you're now the one on trial." This is the most sophisticated manipulation tactic, used by psychopaths and dark triad personalities. Research on 315 participants found primary psychopathy strongly linked to projection accusations. Studies of 765 employees showed 70% of manipulators use deflection tactics, and DARVO is effective in 68% of workplace disputes. Why does it work? It makes you defensive about your psychology instead of their behavior. It uses the concept of projection, which is real, as a weapon. It exploits cultural awareness of psychology terms and creates infinite regression where you question, "Am I projecting? Am I projecting my projection?" It's particularly effective on introspective people who do genuinely self-examine. The defense is counterintuitive. Don't defend against the projection accusation. That's the trap. Instead, return to specifics. Let's set that aside. Did you do this specific behavior, yes or no? Name the tactic. That's DARVO, deny, attack, reverse. I'm not discussing my psychology. I'm discussing your behavior. Stick to observable facts. I observed this specific action. That's not projection, that's observation. Refuse the derailment. We can discuss my issues separately. Right now, we're addressing this concern. Think of this as a reflect spell. They're trying to bounce your attack back at you. Counter it by being immune to reflect and maintaining your original line of attack. Question 4. Aren't you man enough to handle this? This question directly challenges masculine identity and activates the hero archetype compulsion to prove yourself. The manipulator exploits cultural masculine conditioning, creates shame around perceived weakness, and forces you to perform masculinity through compliance. Every griefer knows this one. What are you, scared? Pussy? In voice chat when you don't want to make a risky play. Or imagine being too afraid to 1v1 me, to bait you into an unfavorable engagement. They're exploiting masculine pride to make you act against your own interest. In workplaces, it's, "I need someone who can actually handle pressure before making unreasonable demands," or "This is a man's job, maybe you're not cut out for it." In relationships, it's, "A real man would be able to provide better than this," or "You're not man enough to handle me." Socially, it's direct challenges like, "Don't be a pussy," or "Man up and deal with it." Research from a study of 606 participants in 2025 found that men receiving gender-incongruent information experienced public discomfort and anger, increased aggression and dominance behaviors, and compensatory acts to re-establish their masculine identity. A study of 574 participants showed masculine gender roles powerfully predict emotional manipulation vulnerability. For males, masculine roles were the sole significant predictor of manipulation susceptibility. The statistics are stark. Hegemonic masculinity significantly predicts both willingness to emotionally manipulate and perceived ability to manipulate. Used in 63% of workplace manipulation targeting men and present in 71% of abusive relationships targeting male victims. Why does this work so devastatingly well? Cultural programming equates masculinity with stoicism, toughness, providing and protecting. Shame is the strongest motivator. Nothing motivates like fear of being seen as less than. The hero archetype activates automatically. Status anxiety is real and powerful. Any emotions or vulnerability labeled unmasculine become shadow material you desperately hide. The defense requires redefining masculinity on your terms. Recognize the manipulation. They're defining masculinity to control you. Reject their frame. I don't need to prove my masculinity to you. Name the tactic. That's a shame-based manipulation tactic. Maintain your decision. Don't let masculine challenge override your judgment. Use responses like, I'm secure enough in my masculinity to set boundaries, or real strength is doing what's right, not what proves something to you. Reframe masculine identity. Real strength is setting boundaries, not crossing them. Real confidence is saying no when you mean no. Real power is not needing to prove anything. Real masculinity is authentic self, not performance for others. This is a taunt ability in gaming, designed to force engagement when you shouldn't. Skilled players ignore taunts when tactically disadvantageous. Apply the same principle in real life. Question 5. Everyone thinks you're the problem. Don't you see that? This question weaponizes the collective unconscious and group psychology. The manipulator invokes imaginary group consensus against you, exploits the fundamental human need for belonging, uses triangulation by bringing third parties into two-person conflict, and leverages social proof bias. They may be completely fabricating the everyone. In gaming, this is everyone in the guild thinks you're the problem during internal drama, or all 9 reports were against you when banned, which may be exaggerated or false. The manipulator uses the specter of group opinion to isolate you and make you question reality. In workplaces, it's everyone on the team thinks you are not pulling your weight, when it might be one person or completely fabricated. Or, the whole department knows you're the issue, creating paranoia and isolation. In relationships, it's your own family agrees with me that you are the problem, or all our friends think you're being crazy, isolating you from your support network. Jung specifically warned that the collective unconscious makes people ripe for political manipulation, especially in mass politics. Research shows 68% of cyber attacks exploit social engineering, including social proof. Triangulation is present in 79% of narcissistic abuse cases. Social proof increases compliance by 65% in experimental settings and creates self-doubt in 82% of targets. This works because of primal fear. Humans evolved in tribes where social exclusion meant death. We instinctively trust group consensus over individual perception. Isolation creates vulnerability by cutting you off from reality checks. The self-doubt amplifies. If everyone sees it, maybe I'm wrong. The defense requires demanding specifics. Who specifically? What exactly did they say? Conduct reality checks by contacting the people allegedly saying this. Recognize triangulation. If they have concerns, they can tell me directly. Reject phantom authority. I'm not going to change based on unnamed complaints. Name the tactic. That's triangulation, bringing in third parties to avoid direct communication. Often when you directly contact people allegedly criticizing you, you'll discover it's complete fabrication or heavily distorted. This breaks the manipulator's power immediately. Think of this as an area of effect fear spell, designed to make you think you're surrounded by enemies. Counter it by checking who's actually hostile, usually just the caster, versus phantom threats. The numbers don't lie. This is everywhere. If you think you're overreacting or that manipulation is rare, the data tells a different story. 52% of employees experienced or witnessed workplace harassment in 2023. 70% engage in some form of emotional manipulation, according to a study of 765 employees. 74% of adult multiplayer gamers experience harassment, with 65% experiencing severe harassment, including threats, stalking, and sustained abuse. In relationships, 5% of the US population has narcissistic personality disorder, according to the Cleveland Clinic, up from 0.5% in 2005, a tenfold increase. 77% of women aged 18 to 24 were abused by the same offender repeatedly. 45% of women and 65% of men with rape experience meet PTSD criteria from manipulation-based trauma. In gaming specifically, 70% of League of Legends matches contain toxic behavior. 1 in 10 gamers reported depressive or suicidal thoughts from in-game harassment. 68% of cyber attacks involve human manipulation, and 91% of data breaches involve phishing, which is manipulation-based social engineering. You're statistically likely to encounter these tactics regularly. This isn't paranoia, this is recognizing reality based on data. If you work, there's a 1 in 2 chance you've experienced workplace manipulation. If you game, 3 in 4 chance you've faced harassment. If you date, 1 in 20 people has NPD, with higher rates of other dark triad traits. If you're online, 68% of attacks target your psychology. These statistics mean you're not alone. When you experience manipulation, you're not crazy, not uniquely vulnerable, not overreacting. You're experiencing something most people face. Knowledge plus awareness plus defense tactics equals power to navigate this landscape effectively. Understanding manipulation is valuable, but knowing how to counter it is essential. Here's your comprehensive defense playbook. The pause button is your master technique. Manipulation requires immediate compliance. Time creates space for critical thinking and prevents emotional decision-making. Simply say, "I need to think about that," or "let me get back to you." For digital communication, don't respond immediately to texts or emails. This simple technique disrupts the entire manipulation sequence. The broken record method works because manipulators rely on your engagement with their deflections. Repeating your boundary eliminates their leverage and shows unshakable resolve. State your boundary. They deflect or manipulate. Restate the exact same boundary, repeat until they stop or you leave. For example, "I'm not available to work weekends." They respond, "But you're a team player, right?" You repeat, "I'm not available to work weekends." They try, "Everyone else does it." You maintain, "I'm not available to work weekends." This demonstrates that no manipulation tactic will change your position. The gray rock method applies to inescapable situations. Manipulators feed on emotional reactions. Becoming boring removes their fuel, and they lose interest and move to easier targets. Give minimal emotional responses, short, boring answers, don't provide personal information, and act like a gray rock, uninteresting and unresponsive. When someone asks, "Why are you being so sensitive?" respond with just "okay" in a flat tone with no elaboration. This works for workplace situations where you can't leave yet, family gatherings with toxic relatives, or any situation requiring temporary coexistence. Documentation creates an objective record against gaslighting, provides legal protection if needed, gives you reality checks and provides evidence for HR or authorities. After verbal meetings, send emails. Per our conversation, we agreed on these specific points. CC yourself on important emails and keep personal copies off company systems. Document patterns, not just individual incidents. Save positive feedback and performance reviews. For each specific question, remember the counters. For "Why are you so emotional?" redirect to content and name the deflection tactic. For "If you really cared," separate identity from compliance and challenge the premise. For "You're projecting," don't defend against the accusation, return to specific behaviors. For "Man enough," reject their frame and redefine masculinity on your terms. For "Everyone thinks," demand specifics and reject phantom authority. Advanced techniques include the Socratic method for formal settings. Respond to manipulative questions with clarifying questions that force them to be specific, exposing manipulation through their own contradictions. Build a reality check network of trusted people who validate reality when you're being gaslighted. Implement a consequence framework where you set clear boundaries, define consequences for violations, and follow through consistently. Empty threats teach manipulators your boundaries mean nothing. Long-term resilience comes from strengthening self-worth independent of others' approval, knowing your vulnerabilities, and working on them proactively, trusting your gut when something feels off. Continuing education about manipulation tactics, practicing saying no without justification, allowing yourself to be bad by setting boundaries without guilt, and building financial and practical independence that gives you freedom to leave toxic situations. You started reading this as someone who might not recognize when they're being manipulated. You're finishing it with a comprehensive understanding of the psychological mechanics manipulators use and the practical tools to counter them. You've learned Jung's psychological principles. Shadow, projection, persona, archetypes aren't just abstract concepts. They're the source code of human psychology, and manipulators have learned to exploit them systematically. You know the 5 questions and which vulnerability each one exploits. You understand this isn't rare. The statistics show you're likely to encounter these tactics regularly. You have practical tools now: the pause button, broken record method, grey rock for inescapable situations, documentation strategies, specific counters for each question, and pattern recognition for early detection. You've learned the boss mechanics. You know the attack patterns. You understand the manipulation strategies. Now, when someone tries to run the same combo that's worked on countless people before you, you'll recognize it on the first move and counter it. The mindset shift is from reactive to proactive, from confused to clear, from doubting yourself to trusting yourself, from NPC in their game to player character in your own life. You'll start noticing these patterns everywhere. In workplaces, dating, social media, gaming communities, family dynamics, advertising, and politics. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's not a curse, it's a superpower. Some people will recognize these patterns, feel uncomfortable, then return to business as usual. Others will use this knowledge to fundamentally change how they navigate relationships and power dynamics. Which one are you? Jung's work was about individuation, becoming your authentic, whole self, integrating your shadow, understanding your projections, seeing through your personas to your real self underneath. Defending against manipulation isn't just about protection. It's about reclaiming your reality, your agency, your authentic self. It's about refusing to be a character in someone else's narrative. The best defense against manipulation is a person who knows themselves deeply, trusts their own perception, and refuses to compromise their boundaries for anyone. You now have the knowledge, awareness, and practical tools to be that person. Game on.